Going to go ahead and call this Monday, July 17th meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Thanks everyone for coming. We are meeting in hybrid version, both in person as well as remotely via Teams, so welcome to those that aren't here in person. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance. Will, why don't you lead us this evening? Let the record reflect that Councilor Norton is excused from the regular meeting. We'll move on to item 3. We have a presentation this evening from Whitefish Legacy Partners as well as Flathead area mountain bikers to expand the trail and trailhead at Spencer Mountain. Welcome WLP and FAM.
Thank you kindly.
And name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Jed Sankar-Gorton, Program Director.
Ron Brandt, Executive Director of Flathead Area Mountain Bikers.
Good deal. So we are, this map will, make a little more sense in a few minutes, but we are coming in front of you today to talk about trail and trailhead expansion out at Spencer Mountain. So a little bit of background there briefly. So the Whitefish Trail at Spencer is managed by Whitefish Legacy Partners and by FAM out there. There are free ride trails, there's the Whitefish Trail. Both of our organizations have MOUs with the city, and then we work with city council, city staff, through the Legacy Lands Advisory Council, which meets quarterly, just had a meeting in June, another one in November, and then also through working meetings, and then the Whitefish Trail Ops Committee meetings where Legacy board members are also involved. And through those bodies, we've done work at Spencer and then are now working on a new license agreement with the DNRC. So in 2014, we signed a 10-year agreement with them, a special rec use license, basically allowing management to happen at Spencer, allowing the licensing of trails, which involved building some trails and then just bringing existing trails into the fold, and that involved a significant MEPA process to okay those trails, to okay the development of the Twin Bridges trailhead, the South Spencer trailhead. And we are now working with the DNRC this year in preparation for the signing of a new license agreement in February of 2024. And as a part of that kind of run-up, we are taking the opportunity to also look at some kind of needs out there in terms of expanding trails and trailheads. So kind of in this similar vein where we are in kind of like a parallel track to working on the agreement, we are also hoping to propose new trails, new trailhead, get those MEPA'd kind of at the same time. So when we sign the agreement, written into that is the allowance to build these trails and trailhead. And we like the kind of comfort of having those MEPA'd before signing the agreement. So we're working on that. At the moment, we're talking about, we're shooting for a 10-year agreement again. DNRC is more interested in a 5-year agreement. That's just a little detail out there, but that's still kind of moving along. So we are also, now this map starts to make a little more sense. So a piece of this is that we are also thinking about kind of another 10 years out from now, a permanent solution out at Spencer, so permanent conservation. And that would involve a parcel kind of in this north and northeast section of Spencer. And we're kind of factoring that in as we make those developments, or as these proposed developments happen, and thinking about the resource that the community will be interested in permanently protecting in about 10 years, kind of folding that in. And I'm just a touch more, and then we'll kind of dive into this, but so kind of rough timeline. So we are working, obviously we meet regularly with the DNRC, city staff is involved in that, to kind of in these negotiations, preparing to propose this formally, this map to them, for them to MEPA. But then we're talking to local businesses, so Bar W is out there nearby, Whitefish Hills HOA. We're conferring with those groups, kind of keeping them in the loop about this plan, getting input. This would come before you all again. Before the document is signed, there's an opportunity to review it, and then the MEPA process itself, should it happen, does also involve public comment. Okay, so now kind of, what are we actually asking? We're talking about roughly 9 miles of trail in these two kind of focus areas that Ron's going to get to in a minute, and then a new trailhead, which is part of this kind of Highway 93 West development out there. And so if that development does occur, meaning if Highway 93 is widened, the sightlines are improved, then we feel we have an opportunity to add a safely exited, entered trailhead. There's a DNRC access point just west of the old Fish House restaurant there. So we would be looking to add that trailhead at that time, which would kind of improve parking and access writ large out in that area.
A big focus is adding another trailhead. I know I've run into a couple of you out there. It's popular, it's overflowing, and there's an obvious use. So in the first area where a lot of the freeride trails existing already do exist, we're just looking to add some density, and then with that density, there'll also be trails that we hope to have flow over to the new trailhead on the kind of northeast section. That would be, we hope to start that kind of at the beginning of this because we already have access. With that too, last year we had some trail closures out there for logging. We anticipate having those in the future. It went right through the busiest time of the year, so having it so we could have part of the network closed but keep another part open so the community still has that resource. Then having two access points. The second focus area, which is the new kind of east side, which will connect to the new trailhead. That area will offer kind of newer users, kind of more beginner terrain. It's a little more spread out. It'll have another section of Whitefish Trail that'll connect to the south and east side. Hopefully build some of those trails with accessibility in mind, even the free ride versions, a little bit wider and just tuned for that, because that trailhead will be hopefully more conducive to bigger rigs coming in with those types of four-wheel bikes and stuff like that.
So we are hoping to turn this map and a broader narrative into the DNRC as soon as this week, basically, just to start getting the ball rolling on discussing their MIPA timeline. This isn't something where it's not the formal submission necessarily, but we need them to have a look at the map before they can start thinking, how long is this MIPA going to take, those sort of things. But they understand, we think there is need for some more kind of recreation-focused area. This feels like a good space to kind of expand into, and the DNRC is, generally supportive of that.
It's all state trust land there.
Sure.
If you're not familiar with.
And in the packet, there was a more specific map that's kind of a visual of some potential lines. If you have any questions about those.
Has the DNRC indicated if it's going to be a checklist EA or a formal EA, or are they not sure
So
yet?
within the proposed trails that we would be looking to add into the licensed network, some of them are existing. There's like the Ridge Trail that comes off Spencer Summit. My understanding is that, half mile might just be a checklist. The majority of these is a full.
And they're going to take the lead on the MIPA documents,
Yeah.
scoping and everything? Okay.
Yes, they're backed up, but yeah, working through that.
Okay. Any questions for Jed or Ron? Dana, are you seeking formal approval from the council, or was just an informational presentation?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask Jed.
A request for support. Because
Request
we
for
turned
support.
we hadn't put this map quite in front of this group before in a formal sense, and the DNRC has not seen it. Well, maybe they're watching it right now. But, we want to turn this in and keep the ball rolling, and we wanted to get you guys in the loop.
All right. With that said, Frank.
Question, you said, I heard you say this, you're going to add density to trails out there. Do you have any concerns about, by adding the density, you highlight or increase the possibilities of collisions, conflicts?
But yeah, that definitely goes into designing.
Okay.
how it comes together. Make that not happen.
No, that's what was my point, so, okay. No, let's not do
Or
it.
if they do, major speed controls
Yeah.
happening. And
Right,
you've made a lot of those improvements on existing trails, actually, in the last year or two out there, where we know there's horses coming up from one way or
Right.
bikers, and then, bikes move at higher speeds than both of those. So keeping all of that in check is
Okay.
definitely, it's not just scribbling.
and
Walking
I'm,
around.
just on a personal note, I have to say that I'm one of the horseback riders that have been out there. The uniformly, every bike rider I have come across has been as careful, cognizant, and courteous as you could possibly imagine. It's like, it really is it's really nice that we have that and that's there, and we don't have those kinds of conflicts as a general proposition. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Frank. I would entertain a motion for approval.
I
Or
would
support,
move
excuse
that,
me.
I would move that we support the expansion, I don't even know what to call this.
It's
The Spencer Mountain Proposed Trail and Trailhead Expansion for 2024.
Thanks, Steve. Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? We'll be around for support as well during the public scoping period, so please let us know when you need a letter. So
Thank you kindly.
with that said, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Judd. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Heidi. We'll move on to communications from the public. We do have 3 public hearings advertised for this evening, so if you're here to speak to one of those hearings, please wait until we get to that agenda item. Otherwise, if you have anything to bring to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity. Name and address for the record, please. Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 South Main in Kalispell. You have one letter communication from us in your packet. I want to speak to that briefly, and then I have a second item that I'd also like to raise for you. I would like to start by saying, because someone pointed out to me that the images that we included in our comments that went to you were intended to reflect our frustration with the Montana legislature, silencing the public from being more involved in planning in our own communities, and feeling like that silencing is something we don't want to be silenced about. And we respect that as a council, you have always, in the 2007 growth policy, you held numerous public meetings before making a final decision. Had the public hearing that I thought that was going to be held on June 19th was held, you would have heard that directly from me at that point. So since you do have on your consent agenda the ability to pull that resolution off, we're asking that you simply go back and say within the engagement plan, rather than that you may hold one or more hearings before approval of the growth policy, the new growth policy, that you shall hold additional hearings. I don't know whether, I know there's legalistic on whether it should be will or shall. I'll let you figure that out, but it's one word. And I think it just really is also consistent with what the legislature is allowing public comment in the growth policy, but they're basically saying after that, public, you have really a diminished role. And so for you to allow the public to really have that one-on-one with you, which I think has been your tradition, I'm just asking that you pull that off the consent agenda and just amend that one phrase. The second item I want to speak to you on is you're well aware that the county has been working to find a solution to the application of septic waste on farmland throughout the county, which is the practice when there's no other solution. They had proposed to build a composting facility that would link into the lakeside sewage treatment plant. As you also probably aware, they declined in the 12th hour to buy that property. So we have been engaged with the county, and most recently last Monday brought in a firm from Washington State that has a process and a factory, I guess because it's industrial, that they build a unit that takes and is designed to take septic waste and biosolids and to treat that in a manner that greatly reduces the output, produces clean water that's essentially, Bill Gates is famous for having drank the clean water because they spent 10 years working on designing this system for a global application. This would be a local application. But we're also interested in the fact that the product that comes off of this is a dry product. It has 70% the caloric value of a cold, and it would be an appropriate thing for burning in like the Stoltz cogeneration plant, which is generating electricity, or in a cement kiln. And the real issue with the biosolids and the septic waste and a composting application is that there is just, you can't miss the news these days on the concerns with PFAS chemicals and the pharmaceuticals that are in this waste. And we think it's more harm to our water quality locally to see this spread as a application on soils. So we are working with the county to look at this and possibly collaborate with the city of Kalispell. It could be the city of Whitefish. That's why I'm here tonight, just saying that there is a way to co-locate this facility with a sewage treatment plant that actually expands the capacity of that plant. So I have a couple of handouts I'll just leave with you, and please feel free to give me a call. Again, I hope in the next week or so we'll know more about the buy-in for this and if it's a something that we can rally around. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary. Heidi.
Hello, my name's Heidi Van Everen. I work with Whitefish Legacy Partners. I'm the executive director, 525 Railway. And I just wanted to give a follow-up. I appreciate Jed and Ron presenting on Spencer Mountain, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knows we're still working on the Smith Lake project. And so I just wanted to give an update. We're working on protecting 600 acres permanently out at Smith Lake at the head of Whitefish Lake. We're steadfastly working. We've actually been meeting every 2 weeks with the DNRC. City staff is super helpful, helping us move things forward, and we're making progress. We are shooting for April of 2024 as our land board presentation. Hopefully. The state DNRC has hired an appraiser. We're initiating work on the survey, and we have designed trails and are excited about adding density out there. So I just wanted to make sure Andy and Steve are part of our Legacy Lands Advisory Council, but I thought we're going to start coming and just giving you more and more updates. We hope to have the appraisal valuation sometime at the end of November, so we're sort of still in a holding pattern before we know actually how much removing the development rights from this area will actually cost us. We are actively fundraising. We're sort of talking to the people that know our project and understand our work. It's not a private, it's a private campaign, not a public campaign at this point. But we are starting phase 1 of new construction out at Smith Lake this year, and that construction is beginning on Wednesday, so there will be activity out there, and this will all feed into the public recreation use easement out on the landscape. The work that we're doing this summer is going to sort of highlight what Smith Lake the value that it is to the community, providing new and improved access where the trail is currently not very accessible and has been eroding and is not sustainable. We're partnering with the DNRC to do some restoration work to make that be a much more pleasant place to visit. So you'll see that happening out on the landscape, but I just thought an update to know that we're still working hard, and we appreciate all the support that we get from our counselors as well as city staff, because it takes a lot to pull a project like this together. So thank you.
Thanks, Heidi. Appreciate the update. Further communications from the public tonight? Michelle, anyone online? Nathan, by all means.
Hey, Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. I'm just going to pop up here for Ed Doctor because I don't see him in the room yet, and I was just talking to him, but he wanted to make it to chat about the podcast that he's doing over at the Montana Tap House on Wednesdays. Mayor Malfeld was on that last week. So just a reminder, don't know what time it starts, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock?
7, I believe.
Yeah, so 6 or 7 o'clock, Montana Tap House. They're doing a podcast going over all sorts of things happening in Whitefish, and eventually we'll have all the city council candidates and maybe even like some debates as we get closer to the election over there on Wednesdays at the Tap House. So I know he's on his way over, but I didn't see him yet, so just wanted to throw that out there for anybody that's listening. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Sure, Giuseppe. Giuseppe had a question for you real quick.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. I was traveling, so I was intrigued and I wanted to watch it. I tried to go online and I was asked for my credit card, $49.99 membership, and I tried, but it was declined. Since you're stepping in for Ed, is there any explanation to that, or is it free to the public?
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're talking about. I also had trouble finding it. It's not been advertised very well, but I found it on their Facebook page. They recorded it on Facebook Live, and then I think it's also on YouTube. So, yeah, there shouldn't be any paywall behind it. You should just be able to get it on Facebook or on YouTube.
I can forward it to you, Giuseppe. Yep, you bet. Thanks, Nathan. Further public comments? Any volunteer board reports from the audience? How about the council? Not seeing any, we'll move quickly to our consent agenda. You have the minutes contained in the packet from the July 3rd regular meeting. Frank.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to remove the resolution regarding correcting typographical errors.
So that would be item 6C on the agenda. When do you like to address that, Frank, in the order?
Immediately after the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion for the remainder of the consent agenda. Steve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Caltabiano. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Frank, it's all yours.
Yes, as long as we're correcting typographical errors, I think we ought to also, in fact, correct the what is an unintended error, I think, in grammar, and change, instead of may have one or several public hearings on it, I think it should be shall have one or more.
Alan's giving his thumbs up.
We're good with that?
I'll second that. Is that a motion?
Is that a
Yes,
motion?
that's a motion.
Is there a second to the motion? Motion to reconsider?
No, I just wanted to let you all know too that actually if you go down and read the entire Vision Whitefish statement, it actually says at least one formal hearing of the Planning Board and City Council is required by Montana State statute to adopt the final plan, but is likely the Board and Council will hold several. I don't think the intention was ever that a public hearing would not be held. And I have a little bit of issue with the email that says both Alan and I advised the council that one would not be held. I anticipate there will be several held. It will be a robust process, and I think Alan did a very good job. We can definitely change it if you guys want to do, but I just wanted to point it out that I think Alan did a really good job in this document, making it clear that there's going to be a very robust process.
He certainly did.
Yeah, and Mayor, just as a further comment, I agree with you 100%, and I knew that, but my philosophy on drafting is this: if I can change a word and it doesn't change what I'm going to do anyway, I don't care. If it makes somebody
Absolutely.
else happy, I can do that.
Yep, I agree with that. I just wanted to point out that I think it was pretty clear in this document that you guys are going to have a long process ahead of you with your growth policy, and it's great because it's been since 2007, and I think we've needed to do it for a long time, and I really appreciate Alan's leadership in drafting this document and getting us kicked off.
Thanks, Angie. Steve?
Yeah, I just want to say that I think we should recognize Alan for all the hard work he did. I think it was clear to anybody who sat in any of those meetings that we will be having multiple public hearings on the growth policy, and it's kind of unfortunate that this had to be raised in such a kind of in-your-face sort of way. Somehow it got turned into feeling like the city was trying to shut the public out, which was obviously not the case and never has been the case. And I think Alan has done a great job getting this thing going, so I think you deserve the recognition for that.
Thanks, Steve. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us quickly on to item 7, which will be our 3 public hearings of the evening. We'll start with ordinance 23-11, an ordinance rezoning 55 Headman Lane in Section 1, Township 30 North, Range 22 West in Flathead County, Montana, which is currently zoned WCR, which is the county's county residential district, to WR2, which is our 2-family residential district, and adopting findings with respect to such rezone on a first hearing. Wendy?
All right, good evening. So the applicant is requesting a zone change consistent with the recently adopted Highway 93 South Corridor Plan in order to facilitate some future development. The parcel is undeveloped and addressed at 55 Headman Lane and is currently zoned WCR, which is our country residential. The growth policy depicts the lot as urban, and they are requesting WR2, which is an appropriate zoning for the urban designation. Again, the WR2 is single family and 2-family, connected to all facilities and services. Again, the property is 2.5 acres. It's undeveloped with that urban designation. It is surrounded by undeveloped property and churches on the north and south. The property is served by all public services and facilities. We noticed adjacent landowners and advisory agencies and posted in the pilot. We did receive one letter with concerns about where Baker Avenue is going to connect across Park Knoll. It's not going to be on this property, but it is something that we need to think about in the future. So we review zone changes according to the criteria in the zoning regulations. The WR2 is consistent with the urban land use designation. The property will be served by police and fire and will meet all the requirements for emergency access. All the utilities are available and in place in Headman Lane, and it is in our city extension of services plan. Water and sewer are available. Headman Lane is a private road. The zoning designation contains setbacks, height, lot coverage, all the other good stuff that we always have included. Effects on motorized and non-motorized. The property is served by Highway 93 South, and Headman Lane does have an easement that goes across it for future connection to Baker Avenue, we hope, depending on that alignment, and that will be reviewed at the time of development. Again, the property is identified urban with the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan. And the rezoning will facilitate some sort of residential housing development as envisioned by the Highway 93 South Plan. The WR2 would encourage the most appropriate use of land consistent with this highway plan, the Highway Corridor Plan. Staff is recommending approval. Planning Board held a public hearing on June 15th. One member of the public spoke with concerns about, again, Baker Avenue and how it was going to cross Park Knoll. But again, that's going to be likely further to the west of this property. The Planning Board voted unanimously and supported the zone change. Is there any questions for you?
Thank you, Wendy, for your staff report. Any questions? Start with Steve.
Wendy, just refresh my memory, is this adjacent to some of the other areas that we've rezoned recently?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and those used to be WCR as well, and now they're WR2, or do you remember?
I think Dave worked on those.
Yeah, that's correct. Some of them did, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. But this is not adjacent to the proposed Baker Avenue extension anywhere?
I think the Baker Avenue extension is likely going to be a little further west.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not going to abut it immediately. Just due to the topography of the site, that's the most recent plans I've seen.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Wendy? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance 23-11, and we'll hold that public hearing now. I'll ask the applicant's representative first. Will McDonald, name and address for the record, please. Then we'll take public comment.
Yeah, Will McDonald, 180 Fauna Road. Not much to add there. We've been working with our neighbor, and just the biggest concern that we've heard is where Baker Avenue comes in, and we've sat down with Sand Surveying as well as Foley Engineering, which are the professionals that they're working with as well. So I've had a number of meetings. We want to work with them to provide basically, if we need to do a land swap of some sort with them, to what we're hearing from Park Knoll is to really bring Baker Avenue as far east as possible, just due to the topography as it sort of comes in. And so again, we're trying to work with them as much as we can. Their development schedule is a little bit faster paced than we are, and that's why we're coming through just with the zone change, because what we're trying to do is utilize the zoning in order to sort of offer, whether we go sort of a single family or apartments, we will come back through with a PUD or whatever we further decide there, or meet with the city. So again, we've sat down with the city a couple times with Wendy and Dave just to evaluate this, and so we want to step through the process so we're not putting everything, zone change, a PUD all at once. So that's sort of just the 20,000 foot view. So if you guys have any questions, I'm here.
Thanks, Will. Any questions for Will? Thanks, Will.
Thanks.
Any public comment this evening on this item? Michelle, anyone online?
For those of you who are online, if you'd like to speak towards this, please either raise your hand or unmute your mic. Looks like we're good.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for a motion. G-Man.
Mr. Mayor, I just skipped the page. I move to approve ordinance 23-11, and my page jumped. Can we quote all the text of that ordinance annexing tract?
That's fine.
Sorry,
Yep.
as stated on the agenda, please.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Quinnell. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Will. We'll move on to item 7B of our agenda, which is Resolution 23-12, a resolution to annex and incorporate within the boundaries of the city of Whitefish by petition and consent of the property owner approximately 0.99 acres of land known as 580 Lund Lane, located in Section 1, Township 30 North, Range 22 West in Whitefish, Montana, and zone the property to WR1, which is our one-family residential district, based on the findings of fact in the staff report, subject to the recommended conditions of annexation approval. Dave.
Yeah, good evening. So this is the first one to come along of our new process of zoning upon annexation, whereas the annexation and the zone change from county zoning to city zoning comes together at the same time under one public hearing for the council. And so we previewed this at a public hearing, or at the city council meeting about a month ago. This particular property is just about under an acre off of Lund Lane, and it's currently has a county R3 zoning, and it's changing to a WR1, which is our city equivalent of that R3 county zoning. We are looking at a condition on that zone change and annexation that the property owner dedicate a 30-foot wide public access and utility easement that borders Lund Lane along their property frontage. The existing road easement is only 30 feet wide there, and so and it's also on the property owners to the north's property. So with the anticipation that someday Lund Lane might be able to be a full 60-foot wide right-of-way as that continues to develop in the future. It does meet all of our criteria within the code for a zone change, and it meets our annexation policy criteria that you guys recently adopted, the new annexation policy. So staff does recommend approval of this.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Steve.
Again, Dave, refresh my memory. Didn't we annex another chunk of land out there?
We
off
did
of Lund Lane?
previously, yes.
Is that adjacent to this one?
This on the other side of Lund Lane, on the opposite side.
Okay. And did we change
it's
the zone?
that one has a 30-foot private easement on it. It does not have a public access and utility easement currently. However, I think Public Works, when they do extend services out there, if they do, then we'll try to obtain that at that time.
Okay. And is there any other sort of plan for all these lots that are out there off of Lund Lane? I mean, do we know what's going on? Seems
We don't know what any plan is, or if there's any development. There hasn't been any subdivision requests or anything come forward. As far as we know, they're just single-family homes that would like to get on city utilities.
Okay. And they'll have to pay the cost of that to bring it
To
over
extend
from-
those, yeah.
And it'll probably have to come from 18th Street
Yep, exactly.
from the east? Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Dave? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on Resolution 23-12, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public comment on this item? Michelle, anyone online?
I do have one correction before opening it up to online. It's Resolution 2314.
Excuse me.
For those who would like to speak towards this, please either raise your hand or unmute your mic. We're good to go?
Great. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Giuseppe.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve resolution number 23-14 to annex and incorporate within the boundary of the city of Whitefish by petition and consent of the property owner approximately 0.99 acres of land known as Tract 2 ABA adjacent to 580 Land Lane in Section 1, et cetera, as is stated in the agenda.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Is there a second to the motion?
Can I ask a clarification?
Yes, sir.
Does that motion include the condition? Do we have to specifically add the condition into this motion, or is it automatically? There's a recommended condition in the rezone from staff.
I think it's implied just through the report, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
It should be in the resolution.
Yeah, okay. I'll second it.
Okay. Seconded by Councilor Davis. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion also carries unanimously, which brings us to ordinance 23-12, an ordinance amending Title 11 zoning regulations, Chapter 2 zoning districts, and Chapter 3 special provisions, Section 34 regarding marijuana facilities of the city of Whitefish, as stated in Whitefish City Code, and this will be on a first reading. Dave.
So back on February 21st, you guys passed an interim zoning ordinance that prohibited having any new recreational marijuana facilities within city limits, so that we give time for staff and the city council to work on and further study the issue and look at possibly increasing some of the distancing requirements. You guys held a work session where we got input from the council on that, and so we brought this zone change back through the planning board to you guys. And what this does is it eliminates some of the exemptions that the state has and their requirements. Basically, our previous language just deferred to state law and how they, how marijuana facilities have to be buffered or separated from schools and churches and from other dispensaries. And so this change basically eliminates some of the exemptions that were in there, wherein dispensaries that have doors on streets with different addresses are exempt, even though they might potentially be on the same street or next door to one another. And so just with a few changes to the code, we're able to make it so that all dispensaries have to be a full 500 feet from public entrance to public entrance, with a circle rather than depending on the street, from a church or a school. And then we also had a 150-foot setback between dispensaries downtown and the WB3, and that is being changed to a 500-foot distance, which will basically eliminate any new dispensaries from the downtown, just from the one, where the existing ones are located right now. So as I said, this potential change did go through the planning board on June 15th. The planning board did unanimously recommend approval of this, and staff recommends approval as well.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be ordinance 23-12. Any public comment this evening? Ed, you're wearing the shirt. Do you have any comments? Any public comments? Michelle, anyone online by chance?
For those of you who are online, if you'd like to speak towards this, please either raise your hand or unmute your mic. I think we're good.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council. Microphone.
Excuse me. It was you, not me. Yes, I would like to move to approve ordinance 23-12, an ordinance amending Title 11 zoning regulations regarding marijuana facilities of the city of Whitefish.
Is there a second to the
I'll
motion?
second it.
Seconded by Councilor Caltabiano. Further discussion?
Just a question. We're still under the regulation that we need to pass this with a vote of 4 minimum?
Yep.
Just clarification. Thank you.
Steve? All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion carries unanimously as well. Thanks, Dave. We'll move on to item 7D of our agenda, which is consideration to review the proposed financial plan for the resort tax reallocation to include community housing and to schedule a public hearing on August 7th to consider adopting the community housing resort tax plan in ballot language for the November 2023 municipal election. Dana.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. In your packet, you have my staff report as well as the Community Housing Resort Tax Financial Plan that was prepared by the Whitefish Community Housing Committee with assistance from staff. So in 2022, the city adopted a housing needs assessment that set forth a target of around 1,300 units, 75% a need of 1,300 units, with 75% needing to be priced below market value. And then we followed up with adoption of the Whitefish Community Housing Roadmap, and that actually called for one of the top priorities is to secure local funding for community housing initiatives through our resort tax. So asking voters to approve a portion of the 3% resort tax to go to community housing development and programs. The Whitefish Community Housing Committee has drafted the report. The plan details the history of resort tax as a funding mechanism, the proposed reallocation of the 1% that will no longer be needed for the Haskell Basin Conservation Easement starting in February of 2025, revenue projections for the 20-year term, and the recommended uses, including immediate and possible future programs for community housing. There are some key points, though, that are really important. The proposed is a reallocation of the 3% to help move community housing development projects and programs forward. It's proposed that 10% of the 3% resort tax be designated specifically for community housing development projects and programs starting February 1st of 2025. Over the 20 years that resort tax is approved for, it's estimated to generate around $27 million for that 10%. As I mentioned before, the Haskell Basin Conservation Easement will be paid off in January of 2025. So this is opening up more funding for streets, paths, parks, the Whitefish Trail, and potentially community housing. All will continue to see an increase in funding with this proposal. Based on the plan, all resort tax fund expenditures as they are now will be approved on a project-by-project basis by the City Council. And really securing this funding mechanism is a start to the pursuit of other funding options such as grants, philanthropy, business, community buy-in, so that we can really leverage these resort tax funds. So on June 28th, the Community Housing Resort Tax Plan was presented to the Resort Tax Monitoring Committee, and we had a good discussion about that, and really focused on like what was the initial intent of resort tax, which was focused on streets. This proposal does not impact streets. It actually still provides an increase over what we are currently providing for streets. And then that committee did vote unanimously to recommend the financial plan and recommendation to move forward with a vote this fall. On July 6th, the Whitefish Community Housing Committee voted on a 4-to-1 vote approving the final version of the plan and recommending it to City Council. including the presentation of the ballot question to voters this fall. There was one member that voted in opposition who had proposed taking an additional 10% from the property tax relief portion, which was not proposed to change at this point, to 20%, based on concerns that the property tax relief was really not going to residents and more could be done for community housing. So with that, it still was agreed to by the committee in a majority that to move forward with the current proposal, but that we would look into and continue to explore ways to provide for the property tax relief to residents only. There are challenges in state law. Right now, there is a 5% minimum requirement, and it must go to reduce the municipal mill levies. You could not do that based on residency. The additional 20% that we provide, I haven't gotten a legal opinion from our city attorney, but I believe there are programs you could create that could essentially do similar effects of it going back to residents. The state is doing that now. You might have heard about that. You have 2 years where the state is going to give you up to $675 if you are if you own the home and you're a resident, which means 7 months consecutive living there. The only way that I have been able to determine how they're going to confirm residency is through your Montana state income tax. It does say that you're going to have to provide that. On that income tax return, you actually select residents, part-time resident, non-resident. So that's where they're going to confirm that. They're asking for your social security numbers, all your dependents. So they're taking your application for that, and it appears they're going to be comparing that to your state and federal income taxes. We might not have that same capability unless people are willing to provide their income tax returns to us. If we were to proceed in that fashion, it would come at a cost. We would need additional staffing to run a program like that. But again, that's something we're willing to explore and see where we can go with that. But to be very clear, the proposal that was approved by the Resort Tax Committee and the Community Housing Committee is to allocate 10% of the additional 1% to housing and still providing an increase to streets, parks, paths, and the Whitefish Trail. There is no cost to the city to move forward with this proposed plan and ballot question this November, since we are already incurring the costs for our municipal election. If we were to wait and do it at a different time as a special election, there would be an additional cost. We do have to pass the resolution adopting any ballot language at the next city council meeting to be on the fall ballot this year. So the recommendation to the city council is to approve the plan in general, and then at the next council meeting we would bring forward the plan for adoption and the ballot question as well with that resolution. So we're just looking for direction on to proceed with that, where you would make the formal approval of these plans. We did hold it as a public hearing to make sure we had adequate notice to the public, since this is a topic that needs more public input before we get to that ballot language drafting, since it is kind of an expedited process. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Dana. We'll start with Steve and then Giuseppe.
Dana, I just have a question about the summary points. If you have that page in front of you, the fourth bullet down says all resort tax fund expenditures will be approved on a project-by-project basis by the city council. Is this assuming that the money is going to go towards building projects, or can the money be more generally allocated?
That's a good question. So within the plan, we have the different uses, and that's toward the end of the plan, and we have both the development of projects of community housing, so builders. It could be, we're looking at, say, for example, we have in here the Depot Park Townhomes project, Alpenglow 2, the potential Monaghan project, where the request could come forward to have the city contribute funds for the actual development. We also have the opportunity for programs, and so that could be where you have, we have in here an example of what's being proposed by, and it's very preliminary, but by Housing Whitefish, where there's a homebuyer, not a homebuyer assistance, the Whitefish Workforce Assistance Fund, which would help with rental assistance for workers in Whitefish, or you have like a home buyer's assistant program that helps with down payments to get people into deed restricted homes. Each of those programs would be approved by the council individually. The actual expenditures in there, you would set aside a dollar amount every year annually that could go to those programs. You wouldn't have to approve each application for those. But for the development side, we'd be having you look at each individual project and considering, what's the financial gap between market and affordability? What type of units are they providing? Does it meet the community needs of Whitefish, which is identified in our plan?
All right. So to me, that reads, having that in there the way it's stated reads like this is going to go towards projects that are proposed to build things. Is there a way to massage that language so that it could include programs? Could we?
Yeah, you could just say on a project by project or program basis.
Okay.
I think that it's pretty, I think that would be pretty much the general idea of, expenditures. So in essence, council has full control of all finances in the city of Whitefish.
Right.
So you have the budget authority, you give us the authority to spend money. But you could be also broad and just say all resort tax expenditures will be approved by the city council and keep it broad.
I'd rather have that language than, because that gives us more leeway. I'd hate for somebody to think that it's, yeah, anyway, I would just, that's the one minor adjustment I would make at that point.
Giuseppe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dana, am I correct that we're talking about giving direction to the staff on starting drafting what we will go on the ballots?
You are going to give direction to prepare the ballot language that is based on this recommendation in the financial report of 10% to community housing and the other percentages.
Thank you. When do the ballots need to be printed? What's the deadline?
The deadline for us to get the resolution to the county for printing is August 15th, I want to say. So I think it's August 15th. So our only council meeting we have before then is August 7th.
Thank you. And in wording such as, you actually do not know if you're reading my mind, where you said 25% of the resort tax, it's a property tax reduction for taxpayers in the city, which is always like the taxpayers in the city are they residents. They're not, right now, we all know that there are taxpayers with properties within the city limits. And and I'm wondering if there is a chance to, since we're asking the voters to vote on a matter such the resort tax, if there is the chance to figure out a way to say that 25%, given that the council decides, goes back to the residents. And in the city limits, it's easy. They're registered voters. In the state of Montana, a non-income taxpayer will not file a state of Montana income tax in all cases. So they won't have an income tax that says I'm not a resident, unless they produce an income in Montana and they have to file it in Montana. But if I own an investment property here and I do not produce an income here, and I can file in Florida and I do not have to file in Montana, so I am invisible to the state of Montana and I would be invisible to the city. I'm adamant about the fact that we're going to the voters, and I think it's time to consider rebating this money to the residents and not to the property owners that could have 20 properties and they live in another state.
So
it's a question, but it's also a comment. I apologize.
That's okay.
I know I could get a point of order for this.
I would just state that the 5% has to go to all property owners because state law reads, annually anticipated receipts from the resort tax must be applied to reduce the municipal property tax levy for the fiscal year in amount equal to at least 5% of the resort tax revenues derived during the preceding fiscal year. So 5% of our resort tax must go back to all property taxpayers, regardless of residency. They pay property taxes, they get the rebate on their property tax bill. That other 20% is what you guys have the flexibility from a policy decision if you think that the voters will approve that. I will give you my personal concerns this election cycle is the issues that have shown up with the DOR sending out valuation changes and that property taxes are going up, this would be a push coming out right about when the bills come out. The bills would come out before, just barely before the election. We're doing a property tax increase, and then you're asking people to take on a potential increase in their property taxes even further. Now, granted, those people won't be voting because they aren't residents, but I think that there could be some pushback there, just to be aware.
Steve?
How hard would that be to manage from a city's perspective to, we only gave 5% back to everybody via state law, and then we took that other 20% and only went through the voting rolls and gave it back to those people? How hard would that be?
We would be looking at least one additional position. I haven't really calculated what the hours would be. You're talking about potentially 5,300 properties that we would have to be, and maybe more. I don't know the numbers right now. I'd have to get utility billing to get us the actual number of units individually owned. But we would be looking at, a potential of 70%. Right now we have residency, primary residence is 70% based on our needs assessment. 70% of that amount would have to be refunded annually. We'd be having to confirm what's the method of confirmation of residency. How do you get out the notice? We'd have to issue checks. We'd have to determine the timing of it all. So there would be an additional cost to the city. One position you're probably looking at with benefits, and assuming it's not a significantly high-paid position, you're probably looking at $70,000 still.
So we have another municipal election in 2 years. Would that be a better time, in your opinion, to massage this again, or are we asking this too many times to consider the property tax or the resort tax allocations?
So the committee, like the resort tax committee and the housing committee, talked about that. The city council can go to voters any fiscal year, once a fiscal year, to ask question on this. That there was concern about proven track record on what we're going to use community housing funds for. I think there was some individuals that felt that reducing property tax relief when it's been 25% since the beginning, as is, just that question alone, and changing it, because it would have to show up different on the ballot language, may cause confusion, if anything. And then if you were to take it and put it toward community housing and actually reduce property tax relief completely, that would be even worse. And I think it's just trying to prove that community housing is good to go. The less complicated this is, the easier I think this will pass. We just went out for a vote 2 years ago. Retailers don't like when we talk about our resort tax because they're competing with Kalispell. Columbia Falls has now become our own, similar resort community, so that's good, but they don't like bringing it up. Even though we do the vote now, we're not talking about any impact financially till 2025. And so, there could be changes that, the state legislature potentially, though I caution that also just given the target on local governments and Whitefish specifically, how we were left out of the last resort tax bill. I worry they might throw some language in there that prohibits resort tax for us in the future. So with that, I guess that's my comment. I think because we have to move forward by the next meeting, trying to analyze, I'd like to see how the Department of Revenue actually works on this and makes it happen for property owners in Montana, how much time it takes them. Obviously, they're working on a larger scale than us, but I don't think the theory behind it is wrong by any means. I think the residents should be the ones that get the rebate, because they're the ones actually paying the resort tax. But to tie it in with this election, I think you put the 10%, that $27 million, at risk. And I think we need that $27 million now, and this part could be talked about in 5 years.
Thanks, Dana. We need that $27 million yesterday.
Yeah, that's true.
Giuseppe?
Steve, fully agree with your sentiments, and since we're talking, I would look at the picture in a larger way. We are not rebating 25%. The lowest we've ever rebated is 36%. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. So when we're talking
in the
about,
most recent years, sorry.
Yeah, in the last 5 years, the lowest has been 36%. We've rebated up to 46% a certain year, if I remember well. So when I think of me as a voter, voting to take 10% of that, 3% to community housing, I'm all for it. And then I read that the city finally, when they decide what their budget is, whatever is left of that budget that is not going to be spent, either be 25% or 48% of the resort tax, they will take only 5% and give it to the people who are not part of my community. And all the rest is going to be shared amongst us, not the remainder between 25% and 5%. So I bet you that if we look at the general fund or the budgets, those $70,000 will disappear if we save the delta between 48% and 5%, or 36% and 5%, on 33% that are the properties that are owned by people who are not in the city. So that's why I think it's a good time, for the same reasons you're stating. I think it's the other way around. We can tell the voters, you know what, we're going to give 10% for housing, and guess what? You live here, you pay all around, you're going to get the remainder, and we take only 5% and give it to the people from out of town.
Further comments? Ben?
I like the idea. I mean, I think that, I mean, I've complained before about property tax relief being basically a regressive tax structure. In addition to that, I don't know what the numbers are. I don't think anybody does currently, but I'm sure a pretty healthy chunk of that money goes back to out of this state. And I don't like that either. I am very hesitant to try to ask the voters for two completely separate issues at the same time. I worry about that, and I think I'm personally feeling like I don't have a lot of answers about how we're going to even implement such an activity. I would like to, my comment would be, I'd like to see us follow through on that, but maybe not today. Because I think in my opinion, it sounds like it takes more time to lay the groundwork for that. So maybe we should revisit in the future. But I would say I genuinely support the idea. I think it's a good idea, if it can be done.
Further comments? Frank? No.
Giuseppe, I too agree with you and Steve and Ben that this is something we need to look at. But what you may not be able to think through is that a number of the properties that are held by residents are held in trust. And so the property rebate goes back to a family trust. So how do we differentiate? I mean, I think we need to examine these issues, but this is the implementation of this and figuring out how to do that is not in a time frame that we can effectuate and get this $27 million. I think we ought to follow up on it, Giuseppe, but there are many complications in the actual application of what we're talking about here. And so I think we're all in agreement that we think it's probably a pretty good idea for us to examine it. I'm just not sure we can get it done and get it to the voters this cycle. That's my concern.
Further comments from the council? Okay, we did advertise for a public hearing on item 870 of the agenda. We'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony this evening? Nathan.
Hey, Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue, and I am the president of Shelter WF, and I will be speaking in that capacity today. First, I want to start off by saying that 10%, this $27 million over 20 years is a great first step, and we definitely, if that's all we're going to get, we need that for sure. We don't have any permanent funding for housing or housing initiatives at this point. You know, the city has thrown in some money here and there and some land and that sort of thing, but we have no permanent funding source. That's a good funding source. So if you're watching me speak right now, if you see something about this on the ballot this fall, definitely vote in favor of it. But I think the city can do better. And what we're talking about is that 20%, getting to 20% so that we can have more programs, more money for housing. I want to throw out that if we only use this money, this 10%, to build homes, and we use the city's own estimates in the report, and we use the rental homes because that's the cheapest thing that was in the report, we'll only build 48 of the 980 units that we need by 2030. That's a pretty small percentage, it's less than 5%, I think. And so that's kind of the scale that we're talking about when we're talking about the money that's involved here. I think that can go further in terms of rental assistance, down payment assistance, that sort of thing, but that's why I think 20% is better, double the percentage that we're able to get. This property tax rebate that we've been talking about is not very equitable. I would say, according to the report, there's about $2 million that gets rebated on a yearly basis, or is anticipated to get rebated. I think more than $1 million of that is flowing out of town. I got a few examples of that with about 10 minutes of research on the property tax website just to find some of the most egregious examples out there. For example, last year there's a home that's owned by somebody with a Park City, Utah address. They got $7,400. There's somebody with an Atherton, California address, which if you don't know is the most expensive place in the Bay Area. It's where like Mark Zuckerberg lives, those types of people right outside of Palo Alto. They got $4,875. Another place, address in Bakersfield, California, got $3,620. And another place in Washington, D.C., got $2,351. It didn't take me that long to find that. There's a lot of examples out there, clearly. I did my block, my whole block, between 9th and Riverside on Kalispell Avenue, and I'm fortunate because I'm higher than the average here, but there's 9 properties there, 10 properties there. The average rebate that we got, we're all full-time residents. Some of them are renters. Some of us own our homes, $238, right? And so there's a substantial portion of this money that's flowing out of state and or just flowing to the wealthiest people in town, whether they live here or not, that can frankly afford it. And the people that really need the relief aren't getting it. That's $1 million wasted that we could use to either improve town or help people in town. And so what we're advocating for specifically is rather than rebating the money how it's currently rebated, and there's nothing in the resort tax law that precludes this, I don't think, but there may be something in tax law elsewhere that I'm not aware of, is that percentage can be reduced, but rather than rebating it based on property value, if it was just evenly distributed, your average homeowner on my block, and I think that represents a lot of downtown Whitefish, a lot of folks that live in town here would get more money, while there's not, the person in Park City would get $7,000 less probably, and I don't think anybody would think that that's a bad thing. I do want to say that regarding the point that Dana brought up about the data, if we wanted to try to parse out who's a resident or not, Greg Hertz, one of our favorite senators from down in Polson, did tweet that Whitefish may be able to use data from the state, because they're doing this rebate thing. And so I think that's something that we should maybe hold him accountable to if we wanted to go that route, is to use that data from the state, and then we don't have to figure that out by ourselves, and maybe we don't have to have a staff member to kind of figure that out. He tweeted that out there, so we can try to hold him to it. I think it's important to remember that, like, in addition to building housing, this can create programs. And so while maybe we're not just giving the money back to residents, however you want to define that, regardless of whether they own or rent, if there's more money in that pot, we can create rental assistance programs or other things that help renters and help everybody, regardless of whether they're directly getting that refund. And that's why I think evenly distributing that refund and making it so if we lower that refund, evenly distribute it, there's more money in that pot to create some of these programs that can help people without making it like a super convoluted system that requires like a lot of oversight, because we could have just a separate rental assistance fund that people could apply for. I think that's the easiest thing to do. I know that some people probably want people to be, I guess, defined as residents and just like receive money from the property tax rebate, but I think that we can create a lot of programs to help people that actually need it in the meantime. And I think that sooner than later is better to do this. We would prefer that it happens on this ballot initiative, but certainly before 2025 when it actually takes effect. This is something that we need to fix. We're collecting a lot of tax dollars that are subsidizing a lot of really wealthy people that most of them don't even live here, to be honest. It's not helping our community, and so, why are we collecting those tax dollars? But again, I want to say thanks for taking the initiative. Definitely put it on the ballot, and if you see it on the ballot, in whatever form it is, vote in favor of it, because it's going to help our community out a lot. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Appreciate the statistics there. Further public testimony. Name and address for the record, please.
Shannon Clay, 232nd Street. So I'm a resident, and I personally really appreciate the community tax, the tourism tax. I think that if we got more people, I think that if the locals saw more of it coming back to them, they would appreciate it more. And but basically, what I think, what we're speaking to, is that if your tax address is not local, and you get all this money back from the resort tax, and a large number of the community aren't locals, they don't live here. I personally think that you should just do the 5%, and the 20% goes to the programs and projects, and you don't give anyone the rebate. And then that way it's easier. You don't have to think about it. Everyone gets 5%, and then the 20% goes to affordable housing and whatever projects get voted on by the community. And then the community is seeing more of that, and they're getting involved, and they're getting excited, and they get to decide where the money goes. And it's not just, oh great, I just spent all this extra money to pay somebody a rebate that doesn't even live here. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Shannon. Who's next?
So thank you guys for all you do, Ed, Doctor. I own the Tap House. So you're saying maybe wait until the next election cycle to put this money towards housing to vote on it, because it's not there until 2025 anyway? No. Okay, so it will be on this ballot?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, watch the fish tank every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Thank you.
Further public testimony.
Hi, I'm Miranda Hernandez, 470 Antelope Trail. Here, this is my first time here. Nice to meet you guys.
You too.
Yeah, so I was brought to Whitefish a couple years ago because I had the opportunity to work in a wonderful, in my career field job thing, in conservation. So that's how I ended up here in Whitefish, just chasing my, career dream path. And renting has been really hard for me the past couple of years. My first year at my big adult job, I saved absolutely no money at the end of the year, and I was scraping pennies from my room, and I owe that a lot to my rent. I was just paying like way too much, and I was trying to make ends meet, thinking they would meet every month, and they just never did. So all of that to say is I also am a member of Shelter Whitefish and United Today, Stronger Tomorrow, and I would like to see more of that money going towards the housing crisis and building more houses for middle and lower income people, because billionaires and millionaires are coming here and building their own houses, and nobody is building houses for middle and lower income class people. It's making it really difficult, and my phone's dying. Yeah, I pay for this resort tax and I don't get to see much of it. I would like to see More of it going to people who actually live here, the residents of Whitefish who live here full-time, who work here, who pay taxes here in Montana. And I support Shelter Whitefish's proposal altogether. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Who's next?
Daniel Sitter, the Executive Director of Housing Whitefish. Here today to offer our support for the plan. Part of the committee, we've had a lot of discussion about this 10% as well as this 25% going for the rebate. Plain and simple, we want that money to be voted upon and approved. I think that going and having this larger debate about the property tax rebate is absolutely necessary. We need to have this conversation. And also, we don't want to confuse our voters and the folks here locally. If we're saying we want to decrease your property tax rebate, at the same time that property taxes are increasing, I think that's going to bring out some opposition to this that could really jeopardize any money for community housing. As one of the organizations that will be carrying out a lot of the programs, a lot of the building to actually get this stuff done, we'd like to build up our capacity. At the moment, if we get more of this money, we'll certainly get it to use, but at the moment there are no programs that are currently able to do this, right? So I think the council has asked over and over, what's the plan? How are we going to use this money? We're still working on what that plan is and how we're going to get that money out there. So what I would like to see is for us to build our capacity, access this money, get it approved, have this conversation at the council level, figure out some of the logistics and some of the capacity, and then really come and say, hey, look what we've done with this $1 million per year. How can we could double that, right? Look at this other production that we can grow once we have the capacity and once we have a little bit more. As a member of the committee, along with other folks from the Housing Authority, the Chamber of Commerce, who else do we have? The CVB. We've had a lot of conversations about this at the committee level and sent it forward as proposed. Again, would encourage the council to really think about that 20% and how it could be distributed more equitably. But right now, for us at this point, we'd like to see this get passed. And I think the proposal as is will help us get there.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah.
Further public testimony. I'm going to go ahead and close, anyone online, Michelle, that would like to testify?
Those of you who are online, please unmute your mic or raise your hand if you'd like to speak towards this issue. I think we're good.
I'll turn it back to the council for a motion, and that would be to approve the plan in general and schedule a public hearing for August 7th.
I would move to approve the plan as presented and for a public hearing on August 7th.
Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second. And if
Seconded by Councilor Cornell.
would you entertain a friendly amendment?
It's not whether I will, but whether the council will.
I would like to propose a friendly amendment to change bullet point 4 to all resort tax fund expenditures will be approved by the city council, striking on a project-by-project basis.
Is there a second to the friendly amendment motion? That motion does die for failure of a second, Steve. Which brings us back to the original motion. Further discussion from the council?
Take another shot at this. I'm not going to try to change the language there, but I think that's a mistake to leave it as is. I just want to say that it's been a long time coming to get this, to get even to this point with regard to affordable housing and workforce housing and the many other names that we've called it over the years. I want everyone who's here, especially those from Shelter Whitefish, to understand that the council doesn't get to make this decision of where this money goes. The council has to figure out how to get the voters to approve a change in how we currently allocate the resort tax. So it's not our final say. And in this case, I think it's important that we really have to thread the needle to get the 10% off the ground for community housing. And I think it overcomplicates what we could get approved if we start talking about this 25% and the 5% and the number of percentages that Giuseppe was throwing around. I got lost immediately. Imagine what a voter is going to think when they see that on the ballot. So this keeps it clean for this time. This gets us an access to $27 million over the next 10 years, which is about $27 million more dollars than we've ever had for community housing in this town. And I think we need to move forward, keeping it simple to get it approved. And I think anybody who's been through the prior reallocations of our resort tax knows that it's about keeping it simple when we go out to the voters to ask them to change where their resort tax money is going. That's all I want to say, and I want to just thank council or thank staff for putting this together.
Ben.
Housing is a particularly difficult problem to deal with in this town. I mean, the numbers are really depressing. If you look at how many units we need and how much it costs to produce a unit, the numbers are absolutely mind-boggling. And no doubt what's in here isn't enough to solve the problem, and it's not our role necessarily to solve the problem, but if you talk about where does the money come from and what is the most equitable way to raise funds to help those in our community that needs this, if you ask me, the resort tax is really the best possible place. It's the only tax we have that's somewhat targeted at our visitation economy, which is what drives a lot of the problems. So it seems really fair to me that a lot of the funding that we will need over time may come out of the resort tax. And we have a very unique opportunity right now that we've never had, well, at least in recent past, where a third of our current resort tax allocation is rolling off, right? We don't have to pay for the Haskell Basin bonds anymore. So we can allocate this money out of our resort tax without cannibalizing funds from streets or property tax relief or anything else. It's a perfect time to do it. I think the iron's hot. And you've heard me say up here before that we need things to be permanent, and we have to have a long view of setting up things that are going to be there, you know, to help solve the problem 10 years or 20 years from now, and that's what this does. So this is a big deal. I mean, it's not enough money but it's a lot. And within a couple of years, we're going to have more money raised out of this than we've had raised for affordable housing in the history of the town combined. And so I think that's a big deal. I certainly hope the voters are behind this, and I trust they will be. And I think we should all hope that this passes, and I look forward to bringing this back next council meeting.
Thank you, Ben. Further comments from the council? Andy.
I'll just make a couple quick comments as we go forward. Having been through 4 resort tax elections in my career sitting up here, I can tell you that simplicity is the best message that we can take out there every time. And I think we've done better and better every time we've gone back to the voters because we've always been very simplistic in that. The danger we have with this, I think, and as we present it to the voters, that it's probably the most amorphous expenditure of funds that we've ever had. Everything else is pretty well detailed how and where it can ultimately be spent. This is, we don't really know exactly if it's going to be for rental assistance, if it's going to be to put infrastructure in, if it's going to be by land. That's a little bit broader spectrum, and that's the kind of thing that resort tax has always tried to steer away from. That's the way the original legislation was designed, that it is the people's tax and the people are deciding exactly how that money is going to be spent. We're saying it's going to be spent on housing, but again, it's a little bit murkier water as to how that will ultimately be spent. So what I understand the 25% of the rebate to property owners argument, and I think it is a valid conversation to have in the future. I would encourage anyone who would like to see this to pass to stop having that conversation till we get this one passed. Then we have that conversation. I think if you start to muddy the waters, then it just brings it up and people start going, I don't know about that. Because whether you'd like to believe it or not, it is the biggest selling point, and maybe not necessarily for the people that don't live here, that don't get to vote here, but it's really big thing for a lot of people, and people don't necessarily, all they hear is, oh, they're going to mess with the rebate. That's the headline that they're going to see. They're not going to go, I'm going to get more. Some people will get that, but some people won't. So I think it's a valid point, and I think it's something we do need to address in the future. But I would just really encourage everyone as we move forward, if we want this first stake in the sand to get fast and hard in the ground, that we don't have that argument and we don't have that debate as we move forward, because I think it could potentially hurt us. So.
Thanks, Andy. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks very much, Dana. We'll move on to item 8A of the agenda, consideration of a request from the City Council to repeal Section 1-6-3-E-3, voting on ordinances of the Whitefish City Code. Angela.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My staff report begins on 129 of your packet. Before I get into it, for those of you who have not yet met her, Madison Stanwood is in the audience. She will be a junior this year at Whitefish High, and actually took an interest in being an attorney and coming to City Council by her own free volition. So thank you, Maddie.
Welcome.
So I think it was about 2 City Council meetings ago, Council asked me to look into Section 1-6-3-E-3 of the Whitefish City Code, which requires a majority vote of the members elected of the Whitefish City Council for an ordinance to be passed or repealed. Apparently the ordinance has been in fact in existence since 1911. I do not know the history of it, and I did not really look it up. I assumed it was a more recent ordinance. So, and I think in the past we've experienced some challenges for council and staff. If a quorum of council is present, it will require all four of you to vote in favor of an ordinance. I don't know that I've ever had you guys repeal an ordinance, but it could happen. You know, so in basic terms, the ordinance may fail because one councilor voted against it when there is a quorum. Seems kind of artificial. We've also run into some issues of what happens then. You know, if it goes to the next meeting, somebody who voted in the majority can make a motion to reconsider, so the councilors that weren't present can weigh in on the matter. But again, it seems a little bit inefficient to accomplish in 2 meetings what we should have accomplished in 1. Also, and what comes to mind is when staff initiates a rezone with respect to property that's just recently been annexed into the city. If that ordinance were to fail because we simply have a quorum, staff is kind of left at a quandary of, well, what do we do? I mean, we have to zone it somehow. So there are certain instances in state law where there is a majority of the entire council necessary to pass an ordinance, or a supermajority, and the one that I gave you guys some examples in the staff report. The one that actually comes up quite often is the disposal or lease of municipal property, which requires a supermajority of the entire council. So again, you folks asked me to look into it. I would recommend repealing the ordinance because just of some of the challenges it's presented, I think, in the last couple of years in particular.
Thanks, Angie. Any questions for Angie on her staff report? Giuseppe.
Just a question, do we have to repeal an existing ordinance? I tried to figure out from your report, we do not need a new ordinance that replaces that existing one. Am I correct?
You're going to have to repeal the ordinance.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Yeah.
I would entertain a motion to that effect.
I so move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? When Angie said it was crafted in 1911 and we don't know the history of the ordinance, I said, I think Andy was here.
He was mayor back then.
I think I was absent that meeting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Thank you, Angela. We'll move on to item 9, or excuse me, we need to vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Just a question.
Sure.
If this is an ordinance, does it require a public hearing if we're repealing it? Is this an ordinance to repeal an
We're
ordinance? or-
repealing an ordinance,
we
not,
don't need a
it's
public
not an
hearing on
ordinance.
So we will need an ordinance to repeal the ordinance.
Okay, so it will have to go to a public.
So that'll come back. Okay. Thanks for the clarification, Steve. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Dana, you have Dana's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Dana, anything additional to report on?
Yep, two things. Today, Deputy Mayor Sweeney and I met with the regional director of the Department of Health and Human Services, if I've got that right. And just very briefly, 30 minutes, she wanted to share what they're doing at the federal level, what they're focusing on, including the affordability of health care, equity of health care, maternal health, and then focusing in on we did talk a little bit about homelessness, drug addictions, and how do you work with that with the changes in our mental health facilities in Montana. It was a good meeting. I think she'll be able to share some resources with us, but also somewhat discouraging to hear maybe how the state isn't communicating as well with the federal Department of Health and Human Services as they have in the past. So with that, though, I think it's still great to have a connection at the federal level where we're able to discuss challenges that we're facing here in this community. They did meet with Kalispell, with the commissioner, with Commissioner Brodell, as well as the public health officer for the City County Health Department, which we are part of. She has done that. We did talk about how providers for mental health are hard to find here locally when it comes to counselors, therapists, psychologists. We've seen it with our programs having to change for our health care, that it's hard when people need emergent help, or if just to get on somebody's books, you're looking 6 to 8 weeks out if you're able to find somebody. So we're hopeful that changes will be made at the federal level, pass money through. The state was awarded funds. What they're going to do with those funds, she's going to help us by reaching out to the state and looking at what they had applied for and helping us understand where we anticipate those funds to go. So it was a good meeting this morning. Also, this afternoon, met with a group of people about property tax relief, how it's calculated. And in that, Kim Morisaki actually attended, and she's with the Northwest Montana Community Land Trust. And she shared with me that 2 homes, maybe 3, at Trailview are going to go under the Community Land Trust. And what that does is they raise private funds to purchase the land, and then they purchase the land, essentially sell the improvements, and then they have this like $25 a month rent. What it does is bring down a mortgage price from say $398,000 down to $233,000 for these individuals, so it helps with affordability even further. And so it's interesting to see them go through this with 3 of their units. I know that the Community Land Trust, Northwest Montana Community Land Trust, is looking to do 200, have 200 units in the valley, and Whitefish is one of those. So with that, since Ed's in the audience, just wanted to remind you that your next work session will do a closed executive session in the beginning for a litigation update, but we will follow that with a discussion about the casino overlay. That will be August 7th, yes. So with that, that's
Thanks,
all I
Dana.
have. Thank you.
Appreciate that. We'll move on to councilor comments. Andy, would you like to start tonight? Any comments this evening?
No comment tonight.
Ben?
Do you want to talk about the bridge?
Probably.
Well, so could I recap my understanding of the bridge issue is that Mr. Malmquist believes that the city should cost share the improvements on the opposite side of the river. However, staff does not agree with that assessment. Is that a fair way to summarize this?
And the portion of trail under the BNSF trestle as well. So there's actually 2 segments that he's requesting partnership with.
So what I would say is council, I wouldn't say that staff disagrees, it's that we haven't gotten a request from the developer to pay for those until recently. The council hasn't got to make that determination. You guys prepare the budget, or you guys approve the budget. So any financial contributions has to be approved by council. I think one of the challenges with this is, you know, when they proposed the plans to staff, they showed the bridge and the connections on both sides. When you think about the city doing the east side, which I don't necessarily disagree that we do the east side, which is on the BNSF property, because we aren't going to be paying for the bridge. We don't have to maintain the bridge. We know how much Sky Park Bridge costs. But I think just there was a breakdown in communication. If the developer really wanted us to do those should have been conversations had before when they were going through engineering and design, because that might not be what our community wants for that connection on that side. We need to go through the bidding process. They already hold a contract with LHC for that side. How they'll work on that, I don't know. That's not something we can use. We have to go out to bid. So I think that really we've not been able to get an answer from them yet on how much they're asking for. So I guess my recommendation, and Angie and Craig can jump in, is I think I would like to have direction from council to have a formal proposal come forward. You know, either they're saying they aren't going to do the east side connection, the bridge connects to nowhere, or they say we want that connection. Here's a cost estimate we know we have, and that gives council the ability to say, yes, we're going to pay for that portion. We'll move forward. You guys, you know, take care of the bridge and your path on your side, like that's, and then we'll do the path on our side. But do we pay the annual fee to BNSF, or is that something we want that developer to pay? Do we need this bridge? You know, and that's the thing. I think the PUD did not consider the bridge as a public benefit. It was the river trail maybe, but not the bridge. So I'll let Angie and Craig add to it as they want, but I think from a financial standpoint, that's my biggest concern is, you know, council needs to be able to say, yes, we'll partner to get the other side done at what cost, and then we decide to move forward or not.
Sure, and I guess I can just jump in with a little bit of history. Like I said, the first time I was aware that there was even a possibility of a bridge over a river and a trail on the east side was when the BNSF license agreement came across my desk. It was shown on the site plans, just so you folks know, when you approved the PUD, the trail on the west side was a public benefit. The PUD does not require a trail on the east side. My understanding is, yes, it does have some public benefit, but it will also directly serve that development. So again, we just wanted to make you aware of it. Again, it was probably on the site plan in 2017 when it was approved. It didn't really hit my radar until we had a license agreement in front of me. And I might be putting words in Craig's mouth rather, when I don't think that Craig ever really considered that that was going to be a public work cost to develop that. As when I sat in a meeting and Craig's like, well, that would have been in my budget if I would have agreed to that. And I know Maria has some concerns about maintaining a trail that is going to involve substantial retaining walls. So I'll let them speak to that.
Yeah, I think that pretty accurately sums up the situation. I can tell you that when the original PUD was approved, it did show the bridge and it did show the connector trails, but there wasn't conversation about necessarily building those with the first phase. So I don't specifically recall any conversations about the city sharing in the offsite costs. Casey very clearly thinks he does. I mean, we can go back through emails and see if there are those conversations. I don't remember having them, but when Public Works received the engineering plans for the project, it clearly depicts the bridge, it clearly depicts the connecting trails, both on the east and the north, and that was the plan set that we approved, under the assumption that that was what was going to be built. So it really wasn't until about 6 weeks ago that the conversation about the city sharing in the cost came up, in my mind.
And it certainly didn't come up during the public hearings. How would the council like to proceed? I ran into Doug Peppemeyer just before the meeting, and he indicated they do have cost estimates prepared. I'm surprised they didn't bring those this evening, given that was one of their goals, was to resolve this, but maybe the next step would be to request those costs and bring it back on to a future agenda for discussion purposes.
Yeah, and we've done that. It's my understanding that Whitefish Yards actually has a contract with LHC to build those trails. And so I think they're one step further than cost estimates. I think they actually have bid prices
Bids,
locked
yeah.
into a contract. So I'll talk to Doug again tomorrow and make sure.
But do they have estimates for the east side?
Correct.
They do, as well as
I
under the
believe
BN
so.
trestle?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Was the BN trestle portion of the trail identified in Connect Whitefish?
I believe it was, yes.
So there's a nexus there.
And we already have the, when we amended the BNSF lease agreement a couple years ago for the Baker Avenue underpass, we included that connector trail. And so we have the BN easement
Okay.
for that section, or the lease agreement amended for that section. It's also my understanding that to even install the bridge, to construct the abutment on the east side of the river, they essentially have to do all of the grading for that trail to get the equipment down there and be able to place the concrete. So
On the east side?
on the east side.
In the interim, till we have answers to those questions, can we move forward with the BNSF license as well as the DNRC permit, or do you think that would be premature at this time?
I think the permitting is fine. I think the license, you're locking yourself into an annual payment. And so if you're not willing to build the trail on that side, I wouldn't sign the license. We can try to get language changes, but I can't remember, what's the lease? The lease is like, I want to say it's like $3,500 or a little bit more than that a year, and it'll go up annually.
Okay.
And
Steve?
then there's some insurance that needs to be paid for too while they're building the trail, the railroad insurance. I
Yeah,
think it's like
there's a-
$1,700.
Okay.
There's a railroad liability rider that's required, but you typically buy into BNSF's policy for that. So it's kind of like a monthly fee for that insurance coverage while you're constructing on their property. But I'm not sure that that fee was the annual fee. I think that was the,
No, I think that was just the insurance. I think the annual fee is $3,500. Yeah, something like that.
I was thinking that was the application fee. Because in round numbers, I think the entire BNSF loop trail is about $12,000 a year. And what we'd be adding is, a very small fraction of that, but I could be wrong.
Steve, and then Frank?
I'm just really confused, because I clearly remember the bridge from the PUD process and everything. I remember I was like, wow, they're gonna put another bridge across there. And I'm confused that they would go and get a contract to build the east side of the river. And according to Casey, the bridge itself is bought and paid for and on site already. So I'm really confused about why we're at this kind of standoff now. It just doesn't totally make sense to me. And if we're talking about city funding for this, we really got to consider, is this bridge is it a necessity? And how much is it going to cost us, A, to build it, and B, to maintain our portion of the other side, plus pay additional license fees every year, if that's the case. And I get that Casey doesn't want to pay for that. I just don't understand how he even got a bid, contract. He has a contract to build according to you, Craig, he has a contract to build the other side.
Yeah, they essentially have to build the other side just to install the bridge.
Right.
And so I don't know that, they can't even install the bridge without the BNSF agreement, because you can't place equipment on the BNSF property to install that eastern abutment without and maybe it's not an annual lease agreement, but there'd at least need to be some type of temporary easement or permission from BN to do the construction.
The whole thing just really confuses me, and it seems like maybe we need to meet with Casey again.
Absolutely.
And have more time with him to really kind of figure out what does he really want to pay for versus, I think I understand, but I don't think we had enough time with him today.
What's our schedule for the next work session besides the casino overlay and
So litigation
update?
And we have our attorney coming for the impact fee lawsuit.
Okay.
So we need that full time.
Pretty big agenda.
I think really, Casey, I think, could have been a little bit more articulate in what he wanted and what the cost he knows is. And so once we find those costs, I think bringing back to the next meeting what we know that cost is, because essentially that's what he's asking for. And my guess is it has to do with just the cost increases of the project itself for the trail and the bridge from what they had penciled out before. And that's kind of what he led on, I think, at the work session. So if we can get those cost estimates at the next council meeting, we could do a staff report that provides what an estimate is, and if council wants to proceed with building it. I think, it's something council needs to consider when we look at, what is our priority on river trails when we have River Bend and we're doing work there. And, we've been asked by the committee to start saving money for that. That's where these funds would come from. We would have to probably use resort tax in fiscal year 25. I don't think this could be, I don't know how it's going to be built quickly without just spending down cash reserves in the general fund. So I think it's really going to be dependent on cost. Something that's $100,000, that's going to be easy. I can tell you, yes, you have the money. $700,000, that's going to be a big expense that I think we need to really take into consideration. So until we have that dollar amount, I don't know what direction you can give. And so I think without the information that I thought we would get tonight at the work session, maybe we just work with Casey to bring that proposal forward with more clear
That sounds good.
answers for you
We
guys.
discussed it enough tonight, but I agree with you, Dana.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Ben, anything further?
Yeah, just one other comment from the work session. I appreciated having the gentleman from MDT there. It seemed to me like there was a door opened about how to piecemeal the Highway 93 upgrade through town. It seems, I'm sure that none of that'll happen in my lifetime or something, but it seems to me like it would make sense to see if there's anything there that can be done, and at least that way it's teed up, and who knows what happens in the future. But maybe if we could piecemeal the upgrades to Spokane or Baker or anything, I think that would make sense to me.
Agreed. Thanks, Ben. Frank?
Nothing for this evening.
Thank you, Frank. Steve?
Sorry to belabor the meeting, but I do want to just talk about e-bikes for a minute, and I think we, as a council need to figure out a plan for trying to limit their use on the Whitefish Trail, because I was out there today and there's 2 giant e-bikes parked right at Lion Mountain on the trail. I should have taken a picture, but I didn't want to stop. I think there's a couple things that we can maybe work with CVB to get some sort of, and I don't know where we talk about this, or maybe I just reach out to the CVB, but I think we need to work with businesses to have them, if they're renting an e-bike, that somebody signs something that says, I'm not going to ride it on the Whitefish Trail, just like they do in Hawaii. When you rent a car there, you say, I'm not going to drive it on the dirt roads, I'll only keep it on paved roads. And we also somebody needs to come up with a map that says know where to go, and some kind of marketing or messaging about where it's okay to ride e-bikes and where it's not, because I don't think that the businesses are doing their part in making it clear where it's okay and where it isn't, given the number of incidences I've seen myself and I've heard about of people on the Whitefish Trail on e-bikes. So I'm not sure where we go with that, but go ahead, Maria.
I can help you out with that.
Okay.
You've already started having those conversations. We had an e-bike meeting with the businesses who are renting e-bikes within the community. We met with the CVB, city staff, and we outlined almost everything that you just outlined. So we're communicating with CVB. They're working toward their map. Just saw a version of it today. And we're working on the messaging for the community.
Oh, thanks. Okay, well, my job is done then. Thank you. Yeah, that's all I have.
And just a quick follow-up to that, Steve, too. I mean, we discuss it at every trail ops meeting every month, and we're working, there's a lot of messaging going out, and like Maria says, a map coming out saying, here's where you can ride, here's where you can't ride. And so there is actually a lot going on, and we're doing the best we can, and I think there's all the right people involved, and we're still going to have people that are going to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. And the one last thing I want to say is please vote for the allocation of 10% of our resort tax to go to community housing. Thank you.
Nothing this evening? Thank you. Anything from staff, Dana? On that note, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.